It is Thursday. I really hope you guys enjoyed the podcast yesterday with just a few of one of my favorite people in the entire world, as well as just like a little section of the amazing group of people who came with me to work on Kingpin and work on it and make it. By all means, you know, I've been talking about it a lot and doing a lot of press on Kingpin and a lot of screenings and all that stuff, and I want to just like say this. I don't by any means think Kingpin is the perfect project. I'm not straight up over here like delusional, like, oh, next is Sundance and the Oscars, you know? Kingpin is really important for me because it's the first time, one of the first times, you know, that I've really done a big scale project that I was really, really proud of. And so that's been just so exciting. As a filmmaker, you know, it's so hard sometimes because I'm still learning and I'm in this world between independent filmmaking and student filmmaking, and I'm just trying to get better and better with every, you know, project that I do. And Kingpin was just such a big step towards that. I said that when I released the trailer, that Kingpin was the first big step I felt like I took towards getting to the place I want to be with what I want to do with films. So yes, I'm just super excited about that. Today we're going to be talking about the directorial side of things and like what went into it from like a writing and directing perspective, and particularly the film influences on Kingpin. So with that, we're gonna just dive in. I'm gonna actually use the mood board of Kingpin as kind of a stepping off point from that. You could find that if you're listening on our Instagram at Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles. The Kingpin post, you just swipe over and you'll see the whole mood board there. I'll put it up. Also on YouTube, I'll just be like showing it, you know. It's right here, but I'll just like pop it up in the corner or something while we're going along. And yes, so my big goal in film, you know, the big branded statement that I have when I go to film festivals, when I talk about my work on the radio, when I'm invited to events and things, is the idea that at the core of everything I do, I want to reframe violence and sexuality through a female lens. And now, on one hand, you know, that's a very loaded statement, and that doesn't really mean a lot to the naked eye, I suppose. And two, that's something that not only I can do, that's something a lot of other people can do, and that's something that a lot of, you know, that's something that we just need in Hollywood, I think. It's not that the male perspective is bad, it's just there's an overwhelming amount of male perspective, and then we just need an equal female perspective, you know what I mean? We just need a more even perspective on what the world is and how we view the world, I suppose, if that makes sense. And so I'm just trying to show respect for the women who came before me, whether that's, you know, Agnes Varda, Leni Riefenstahl, as you know, as problematic as her legacy is, you know. I'm just trying to pick up the gauntlet in terms of those female filmmakers who came before me, like Hedy Lamarr, who couldn't quite, you know, Marilyn, why are you squeaking? Stop. If you hear squeaks, it's my little chihuahua in the background, just so you know. I'm just trying to pay respect for the women who came before me and continue, I guess, on this road that I see we need in Hollywood, I suppose. And also in that, I really want to platform other people as well, but this is a whole can of worms that I'll get into another time. But Kingpin. So Kingpin, if you haven't seen it, it's a gangster film. It is a gangster film about a woman being abused by her mob boss boyfriend, and so she takes over his gang and stages a full-on mutiny. And so, just the very one thing, the biggest thing is I got a grant for the film, right? And the whole crux of the project and the whole crux of the educational side and the speaking that I did on the project when I got the grant was it's Kingpin, it's a female lens on the gangster film. And what that means to me. Now, as a Latinx woman, one of the things that I decided to do in Kingpin was, you know, place myself in as the, like, woman, you know, as the woman who is taking over the gang. And the thing about that is, a lot of people after the project was over, they were like, oh, you know, you want to talk from a Latinx perspective, but, like, why didn't you bring it up? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you have this? Why didn't you have, like, this backstory? And the thing about, you know, representation that from my perspective is, I think a huge problem with representation right now in Hollywood is that we're only allowing certain types of representation, if that makes sense. So, like, for example, like, the only African American narrative isn't, you know, a slave story and a Tyler Perry movie. The only Latinx narrative isn't, immigrants and, family and Catholicism. There's so much more complexity to those cultural groups that, the very act of having a Latinx woman in a film be a main character and be like a person who's taking over a gang and all this stuff, and not even to talk about the fact that she's Latinx, I think normalizes a different type of look at that experience in a different type of way. Like the very act of having a Latinx woman in a role that's not founded and based in her Latinxness is a political statement in and of itself. And it's not to say I'm shying away from the fact that I am a Latinx woman. It's to say that I don't have the traditional Latinx story in my background. I was too white for the Latinx kids and I was too brown for the white kids. So trying to work that out in cinema and kind of trying to, I guess, give voice and give platform to that in-betweenness and give voice and give platform to non-stereotypical representations of my cultural group is really important to me. And that was a huge thing in Kingpin off the bat. And that was a big part of the, a gangster film through a female perspective or gangster film through a woman's lens. So yeah, that's number one. Numero uno. The other dynamic I wanted to deal with in Kingpin was this idea of women in power and women gaining power. And, I don't think Kingpin answers any of these questions. I think Kingpin just raises discussion questions around this question, Kingpin furthers the discussion, I suppose, because I don't think any film really has answers to anything. I think films just help us try and work things out, if that makes sense. So that was what I went into with Kingpin. I'm not looking to answer, female lens and whatever, because I'm only one female lens on the genre, and we need multiple female lenses on the genre. But anyway, the other dynamic was the idea of women in power and how they gain power, and, how men respond to that. There's one type of man that's okay with a woman in power, that's not threatened by it and that's not upset by it, and that's fine with women being in power and fine with taking the lead, or that's fine with being led by women who are strong. But then there's another type of man, for some whatever reason, they're threatened by women in power, they don't want women in power, they don't think women should be in power. And it's like, what is the difference between that type of man? What's the difference between a man who is okay with it and a man that's not okay with it, What does that look like? What does that mean? And then also, I guess, in terms of the men who aren't okay with women, there's a whole other can of worms to open that, I think discussing toxic manhood and how patriarchy affects men, because, patriarchy affects both men and women. How do men deal with themselves and with the world around them when they feel that they are shortcoming and when they feel that they're not when they feel like they're not, I guess, living up to their manhood? How do they react with the world around them when they need to compensate for something, if that makes sense? That's not to drag men, but that's just an interesting archetype of men that, I think we need a female perspective on, because we get a lot of male perspective on that. One of the prime examples is Taxi Driver. The whole film is really about Travis Bickle, trying to figure out and deal with the world around him when he feels like he's not living up to his potential as a man in society, if that makes sense. And so this is just a female look at those two types of men, and with that particular type of toxic man, what does that look like from a female perspective when a man like that lashes out because they feel like they have all these shortcomings and they don't know how to deal with those shortcomings in a productive way and in a good way, blah, 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 all that stuff. So those are two kind of the big threads in Kingpin that I really confronted. In terms of sexuality, it was my first look at burlesque and things like that. So actually I watched the movie Burlesque a lot. The movie Burlesque, the movie Cabaret, all of Bob Fosse's work. Oh my God, Bob Fosse is just number one for me. All of that work was so, vital to Kingpin. It's in a couple places in the mood board that you can see. But looking at how, women are framed, it's just so interesting to me because, I'm going to talk about this in the next couple weeks with The Night Porter. The Night Porter is a Nazi exploitation film that deals with BDSM. And when I watched it in a film class, one of the questions was, "Oh, this is a female film director. Why did she shoot sexual situations for a male lens? Why did she shoot sexual situations for a man?" And it's like, no, women have those desires. Women have those thoughts and those feelings, and women, are able to express their sexuality, and looking at that through a female lens is really interesting. It's not that women are doing this for men, it's that, you know, women who are embracing themselves, I suppose. It's like the idea of not only a woman in power, a feminine woman in power, and what's it like for a woman to embrace her sexuality and her femininity for herself as opposed to like a man, as opposed to for other people. It's really interesting, and that whole dynamic is very interesting in terms of like burlesque and sex and all that stuff that I love to deal with in film. In terms of the gangster film genre, I think when you're making any film, any genre film, you know, this film is specifically a genre piece. You know, it's about looking at the building blocks of what a gangster film genre is. And I think for filmmakers, the mic keeps like turning. I don't know if you guys can see it in the video on YouTube, but the mic keeps turning on me. So just a heads up if audio is weird. When you're looking at a genre film as a filmmaker, you know, I think this is important to do if you're a filmmaker in general, but like, you know, particularly important if you want to look at genre film and redefining genre film, you should really understand the history of that genre. And the gangster film genre is something I've had a history with for so long. Like when I was a little kid, actually, you know, I'm just gonna go ahead and give my whole sob story spiel. My dad was involved in organized crime for a really long time, and there was an incident that happened right before I was born while my mom was pregnant with me, where my family actually had to flee this area they were in. My dad turned his guns into a priest, and they moved us to like a completely different area so that I wouldn't have to grow up with that kind of situation, which is really like dramatic and cinematic, I like to say. But so I think my dad, in a lot of ways, you know, he was a lot like Ray Liotta in Goodfellas, towards the end of Goodfellas. You know, that's kind of like the life he's had, I suppose. So I think in a lot of ways he used gangster film as an outlet for the life he couldn't live. And so that resulted in me being exposed to gangster film from a very, very young age. And so, you know, for like the very first film I ever remember seeing was The Godfather 2. The scene where they're sitting at the table talking about how they're going to get kicked out of their apartment because they have a dog and there are oranges on the table. That's the very first scene I ever remember seeing in any movie ever. And so like that, on top of, you know, I watched The Godfather from a young age, I watched Goodfellas from a young age, Casino, all these films I was exposed to at a very young age. And the interesting thing about those is that, you know, so not only did I have a general understanding of what the gangster film genre was, I was really empowered by the women in the genre because they were really the only example of strong women that I had in my life. You know, Connie from The Godfather, Michelle Pfeiffer in Scarface, you know, Karen in Goodfellas. Those women were the women I grew up wanting to be. You know, also, I grew up wanting to be Michael Corleone. I was a weird ass kid. We're not gonna go into that psychological drama conflama, but yeah, so I grew up with these gangster film icons, and I grew up wanting to be that. So, you know, the genre, not only I have a strong personal history for it, I wanted to even go back further and even look at the genre in other ways too, you know, because the gangster film genre, in a lot of ways, you know, I think film started with gangsters. One of the very first narrative films ever was The Great Train Robbery, which, I mean, it's not the type of gangster we think about today, but in and of itself, it's a gangster film, you know? So looking at that and looking how that was done versus, you know, and how that kind of fed into like Musketeers of Pig Alley, the 1930s gangster films that kind of were a voice for a generation in terms of showing you that success could be found when society fails you. You still can find success, I suppose, like living vicariously through gangsters in the 1930s. And even beyond that with the, you know, Scorsese and, you know, Coppola and all of those filmmakers that redefined the genre again, Brian De Palma, and then going into modern gangster films today. Like, it's just such a traditionally American genre, which is really interesting to me because America it takes a lot from European film, but gangster film is one of the only genres that I see rooted in American cinema. But gangster film is just so interesting, and it's so, you know, archetypical, you know? You have, like, one of my favorite archetypes to look at is literally, I just call it Joe Pesci. Like, you know, you just call the gangster archetype Joe Pesci and you kind of immediately understand. He was a huge influence on me in the development of this project. Like, the main character, Bill, a lot of Joe Pesci went into that character for sure. Because I think Joe Pesci, I don't know, he's just the perfect gangster. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts or ways around it. Also, you know, Michael Corleone being such an important figure for my life and my individual development in addition to my filmic development, you know, understanding that intelligence that it takes to run that type of organization, and the intelligence it takes to stage certain things and to get away with certain things, and et cetera, et cetera. That kind of, I guess, brain building went into it. And even further than that, I mean, to use an example of a woman who has that side kind of time, to use an example of a woman who has that kind of same attitude is Jackie Brown from Just Jackie Brown. You know, Jackie Brown, there's a short heist sequence in Kingpin, which, like, you know, people have seemed to be perceiving it well. I think it's a little bit lame in terms of heist sequences, like, not to talk crap about my own film, but I think it's a little light, you know. It's like diet gang, it's like the Diet Pepsi version. It's like the generic brand cereal of like a heist you'd want to do, you know? But looking at Jackie Brown was really important for the development of the heist sequences. I didn't really look at Mission Impossible or any of those types of heist things. I would say Jackie Brown and Logan Lucky were the two that I really emphasized and focused on in terms of heist. But yeah, those are two other films that influenced the film. The one film in particular that I paid homage to in the very opening scene of the film was Destry Rides Again. There's a really amazing poker sequence at the beginning of it where they're playing Texas Hold'em, and it's pretty much, you know, it's pretty much beat for beat that scene in Destry Rides Again. So yeah, and it was just really interesting to kind of like take that source material and adapt it to a different time, adapt it with different kinds of understandings and different kinds of dynamics. Because I mean, I think it's interesting that at the core the relationships are very similar, but it's just kind of disguised in a different costume, I suppose. And I love that poker sequence. I'm super into poker. I love poker so much. It's because, okay, a huge part of my work and a huge influence on me, and one of my favorite places, it's literally tied with LA for my favorite place in the entire world, is Las Vegas. I am obsessed with Las Vegas. I think Las Vegas is such an interesting town. It means so much to me. It's the place I go when I need inspiration. It's the place I go when I need to get away. It's like, it's just, I'm getting emotional. What is wrong with me? I'm getting emotional about Las Vegas. Jesus. Las Vegas is just, it's my home away from home. It's my heart home, I guess, you know. It's where I go to recharge, which is interesting. It's an interesting place to say when you go to recharge, but like, I could be on the Las Vegas Strip for years and be as happy as I was the first day I ever was there, you know? But poker is really important to me, was the point I was trying to make. And so, you know, I think poker is the most cinematic, you know, and I don't know, okay, straight up, slot machines, poker, all that shit is the most cinematic thing ever. And I really wanted to work out the dynamics of a poker match and like the tension of a poker match, et cetera, in Kingpin. And the reason I think why I went with trying to homage the Destry Rides Again scene and using that as a way to kind of create beats for it was because, you know, going into the project, I didn't quite understand poker. I really liked it on an aesthetic level, but I didn't quite understand, you know, the dynamics and the situational elements of poker. I actually was fortunate because I have like full access to Masterclass. I pay for it every year, so I have access to all the classes. And I actually just watched through Daniel Negreanu's poker class in preparation for it. So, but even then I didn't quite get it, you know, I mean, it didn't quite click for me. So being able to homage a scene that I love so much in a movie I love so much with my mother, Marlena Dietrich, and using that as a kind of template for how the scene works out was really helpful to me as a filmmaker. So that's like the first scene of Destry Rides Again. Also, one direct homage that I just straight up stole was Casino. Sharon Stone's really creepy boyfriend is called Lester Diamond, and I just straight up used the name for like the gross poker character that gets screwed over in the first poker match, you know? His name is just straight up Lester Diamond, which is the funniest name I've ever heard in my life, and thank you so much, Scorsese, for writing it and not, you know, hopefully you're not mad that I used it. Please don't. I love you. I really respect you. Anyway, that's pretty much in basic all of the things that went into Kingpin. When I was developing the visual look of the film, I sat down with my crew about I want to say like 6 weeks or so before filming. I like to at least 6 weeks is the absolute latest I will meet with crew before filming, before pushing back schedule, because, you know, it's really important for me to develop a visual look for my films that's collaborative, and a visual look for my films, and to work with the crew ahead of time. You know, that's just really important to me. I think it's like something that student filmmakers don't do as much, and I think they should do more of. But So when we sat down to develop the look of the film, I actually showed them the Again teaser from Fosse Verdon. I'll stick it in like the corner here if you're watching on the YouTube video, so you can kind of like get a general look of what it looks like. Those kind of color filters, because I really wanted to push myself out of the box in terms of color and in terms of, you know, cinematography and visual style. I'm very fortunate that I have access to a very cinematic camera. I have access to a Blackmagic camera and a Blackmagic 4K. You know, I don't just have like DSLRs, which I'm really, really fortunate and privileged to have, but so with that, I was like, okay, I already have the means to like make this a little bit more cinematic. Why don't I just really push the envelope and really, really push myself out of my comfort zone with color, which is what I did, and I think it was to success. I'm looking at color a lot in my next film as well, and a really important thing to me with that I learned from Kingpin was not only flooding with color, but making sure you flood with color and then you also, in addition, light the space in order for it to be you light the space in order for the color to come through, but also everything to be seen. It kind of worked in Kingpin, like the darkness worked in Kingpin, because, you know, it's like a gritty club and it's all at night and it's all like gross and dirty. But it did, you know, I don't think it'll work going forward, and it's something I want to improve upon. So yeah, looking at lighting is another thing that went into Kingpin that I'm kind of continuing to push along. I guess to kind of fully talk about the feminine perspective on the film, a really important gangster figure for me was Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot, which, I mean, some people would argue is not a gangster, you know, which some people would argue is not a gangster film. I think it's a gangster film. I think she's a mall. We won't go into that discussion right now. That's for a larger podcast, but kind of trying to emphasize that a feminine woman can be a gangster, or a feminine woman can take power in that type of situation, was another important thing for me in terms of, you know, redefining the genre of gangster film. Because it's like the feminine women in gangster film are strong, you know what I mean? But they have power in secondary types of ways. They're not the forefront of power, they're the behind the scenes of the power. Wow, this mic is completely turned. They're the behind the scenes of the power, you know, in the film, and the power dynamics in the films, in gangster movies. And so I wanted a woman that was hyper feminine at the forefront of power in the film. So that was another huge goal of mine. And looking at Marilyn Monroe's reception as a feminine woman not being able to be a mall, or like that argument that because she's feminine she can't be a mall, she can't be a gangster figure, was a huge point of inspiration for that. So yeah, that's a pretty good majority of all the films and all the influences that went into Kingpin, both visually, stylistically, narratively, etc., etc. This project has once again been so important to me. I did this kind of film series, the talking with the actors and the crew, you know, talking about the creative process, and then even on my own channel, you know, talking about color theory and Kingpin, etc., etc., and how I got that look. I did all of that because I'm promoting this, you know, screening event. If you're listening in Colorado Springs, or if you're listening in Colorado in general and you just want to come down, on July 19th, 6 to 8 p.m., Kingpin will be screening at the UCCS downtown space on South Tejon Street. Address and event details will be down in the description box of the YouTube video. But yeah, we're screening, we're doing a panel. 7 of the cast and crew are confirmed to be on the panel, so I'm super, super excited about that. And you know, I'm just so excited. It's just gonna be so great. And it's so nice to see like something you put so much effort into be received so well, and like people have been being so supportive of it. It's just been so exciting, and I'm so unbelievably grateful. But yeah, thank you all so much. I will see you on Saturday. I'm pretty stoked about that. We're talking about true romance, so it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a good one. I hope you guys are liking Nick and the Saturday show, because I am. But yes, I will see you guys then. Mwah.